Hi, I'm Dee Good with Shambhala Mountain Center, and I'm delighted to be speaking today with Andrew Holecek. Andrew is an author of a number of fascinating books around lucid dreaming, dream yoga, and on death and dying. And soon, Andrew will be leading a retreat at SMC on Graceful Entry. So this is a series of yours about the Bardo, yes?
Yeah, it is. As I go older, and I have a lot of friends who are getting older, this kind of what they call the silver tsunami, the boomers heading into, retirement age. There's increased interest in end of life, and I am really excited about providing both teachings and in particular practices, ways to literally prepare across the entire spectrum from spiritual to practical to medical to legal, kind of a full spectrum approach to really help people prepare for end of life. And so this program that I'm so excited to be doing with you all at SMC in August is called Graceful Entry. It's a complete standalone program. In other words, even though this is part of a series, each one is completely designed as an entity in itself. So there are no prerequisites. You'll do not need to have attended anything prior to this. But this particular program is on the Bardo, and Bardo is a Tibetan word that means gap transitional process. And it's a really compelling term that refers to the space, the gap between any two states of consciousness. And so Bardos occur between every moment, between every day. And obviously, in the instance of this program, we talk about it in this kind of archetypal expression as the gap, the space, the bardo between lives. That's what the Tibetan tradition has tremendous kind of literature on. And so this one's called the Karmic Bardo Becoming. And it's really all about the principal dimension, according to the Tibetan worldview, where most of us will spend our time, if we believe in this sort of thing, after we die. And you mentioned earlier, Dee, that I teach a little bit on lucid dreaming and dream yoga. And in fact, there's a very, very deep connection between these nocturnal meditations. In fact, in the Tibetan tradition, death is often referred to as literally the dream at the end of time. And so just like we fall asleep every night, in fact, this is one of the reasons dream yoga came about, to prepare for death. According to the Buddhist tradition, we fall asleep after we die, so to speak, and go through, an otherwise quite bewildering set of experiences. And so this program is designed to, I sometimes playfully say, install a kind of GPS, a global positioning system that will allow you to orient yourself in a set of experiences that otherwise can be a bit overwhelming. And so I'm just really excited to be able to do it, especially in a setting like SMC that's so impactful. We are very careful about where we choose to do our programs. And SMC just has so much energy. It's just a really powerful place to go deeply into these kind of teachings.
Yeah, I'm curious. I know that you mentioned that this is from a Tibetan tradition, ancient wisdom that you're drawing on these teachings from, but I'm curious, how do we know what will be helpful practices at the
Yeah,
time?
what a great question. So according to not just the Buddhist tradition, I'm going to be emphasizing primarily the Tibetan Buddhist tradition because it has the largest literature of what's called thanatology, which is the study of death and dying. But I will also be drawing my approach is very integral in scope. I draw on psychology, philosophy, integral studies, and other world wisdom traditions. And so the practices and teachings I'll be presenting will be drawing on all these different strands. And it's really this kind of multifactorial, systemic, comprehensive lens that I think brings a great deal of credibility and also a great deal of practicality and applicability to this. That to answer your question very specifically, according to not just the Buddhist tradition, but other world wisdom traditions who have a non-materialistic approach to the end of life, the journey after death is a journey of the mind, a journey of the heart mind. And so if that's really true, and a lot of incredible masters from many different world wisdom traditions really proclaim this, we can make this journey preemptively, so to speak. We can explore the terrain during our lives with meditations that are specifically designed to introduce us to these bandwidths of mind. And that's really the tremendous power of these teachings is, as they say, actually this comes from the Christian esoteric tradition. You know, if you die before you die, then when you die, you will not die. And so what this really means is that if you let go, letting go is a euphemism for death. If you let go of all these false levels of identification, these materialistic forms of identification before you're forced to at the moment of death, then death becomes fundamentally an illusion. In fact, so that, you know, to shoot all the way to the very apex of what especially this program is about, is to show you the death of death, that death only occurs, only takes place in the world of form. And so if we can transition our identity, which is in fact what death forces us to do, but if we can transition our identity now on our terms, using meditations that in fact allow us to do that, we can utterly 100% completely prepare for death. And in so doing, really, for people who are spiritual practitioners, it brings an entirely new lens to the meditative trajectory, because it really points out how, upon close examination, really the spiritual path is a kind of death in slow motion. And so if we go all the way to the very fruition, you know, for the truly realized awakened ones from any wisdom tradition, death is an illusion. Death only takes place in the world of form. And this may seem like wildly esoteric and unavailable to us, or even theoretical. Well, it's only theoretical because we haven't experienced it yet. But we can actually experience this sort of dimension of mind because it's really who we are. So that's what makes this stuff so terribly exciting to me, is it really, with the proper preparation, we transform what is arguably the greatest obstacle in life, which is the end of it, into quite literally a once in a lifetime opportunity. And all the world wisdom traditions that I've studied have proclaimed that if you're prepared, and that's what this program is designed to do, is prepare you, there are more opportunities for rapid psychological and spiritual growth at the end of life in the death process than there is in life. And so when you understand that, oh my gosh, this is a total game changer, right? So instead of dreading, fearing death, really you can almost look forward to it, in the sense of having a really solid understanding and even experience of what it is that may actually transpire. So that's the real power. We provide the maps, that's the installation of the GPS. And then a big part of this program, and why it's so great to do it at Shambhala Mountain Center, is engaging in the practices that help us actualize this view. So that's the real power of this tradition.
Mm. So is it the fear and dread that increases our suffering around death?
Oh yeah, for sure, don't you think? Yeah, I mean, we're always afraid of what we don't know, right? I mean, when you think about the nature of fear, and that's actually, there's an entire talk based on this topic, because it's so central. How to actually bring fear and anxiety, which again, we tend to see these as obstacles. Well, if we look at what fear and anxiety really are, even during life, there are profound opportunities. There are approximations of openness. And so what we can do is arm ourselves with a skill set that fundamentally uses this most unwanted of all experiences, again, as a kind of archetype, to work with unwanted experiences across the spectrum of life. And so that's the tremendous, I think, broadband of this program, is that we target the end of life almost as an excuse to talk about the little deaths that happen all the time in our lives, to work with unwanted experiences that happen all the time in life. And so I think everybody that leaves this kind of program comes out going, oh my gosh, I had no idea these Bardo teachings had such immediate and vast applicability. You can use this stuff day one to basically every experience that occurs in your life. And that's the real power. It's not just what happens at the end of life. This death principle applies to anything that ends in life. And like, what doesn't, right? Everything ends. And so in a certain way, it's what I playfully call stealth help, right? So we use the Bardo teachings as a way to sneak in the stealthy way all these wisdom teachings to help us realize that uh, um, these magical tools in meditation apply right here, right now. That's one of the great surprises of this material.
And what if I am not 100% sure about my belief in rebirth
Sure.
or the afterlife?
Yeah, it's not mandatory here. I mean, really, again, what we're fundamentally going to be doing is exploring the nature of our own mind and our own heart. And if these kind of reincarnation principles don't resonate with you, honestly, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter a whole lot. Because when the teachings are presented, and then in particular the experiences are there to bring these teachings to life, you realize that, like I mentioned earlier, they apply to any situation that ends. And that's the really cool thing. So I think anyone who has a non-materialistic approach to death will derive a great benefit. And for those who really come in, and I actually love this sort of stuff because I have a fairly rigorous scientific background, and we'll be doing a presentation on this as well. There will be an entire talk on the problem with proof. Like, how do we know this stuff is true? Even though these great masters from all these wisdom traditions have been proclaiming this, how do we know they're true? So I will go through. This is such an important topic, an entire presentation on the problem with proof and how once we understand the the nature of proof in this larger spectrum, really at a certain point, not only do these principles of the continuity of consciousness become tenable, they become quite unavoidable. In other words, it's like, whoa, now I get it. Now this makes sense to me. And so again, what I will do is like show you like, okay, every night when you go to sleep, well, that's like a miniature death, right? And yet something continues. I mean, when you fall into deep dreamless sleep, lights out, you're not there. What continues through deep dreamless sleep? It's exactly the same dimension of mind that continues, according to the wisdom traditions, through the blackout at the end of life. And so we'll be talking about that kind of momentum, that push. The big word is the phenomenology of what takes place during these transitional processes. And so therefore, again, it's this broad spectrum approach that I think makes this program unique. Yes, for sure, I'll be drawing a lot. The principal template of teachings will be from the Buddhist tradition for sure. But the Buddhists they don't have a patent on truth, right? And so there are lots of other philosophical schools, transpersonal schools, and even some. I'll be sharing some super interesting scientific studies that I'm somewhat involved with that will be real eye openers to people. There are actually some really eminent scientific laboratories right now that are actively studying some of these principles that are really eyebrow raising when you hear about what's actually taking place, lending even scientific credibility to some of these otherwise outrageous proclamations from the wisdom tradition. And so that's what makes me excited is I bring the best of the ancient East, so-called East, conjoined with the best of the modern West, science and spirit, as a way to create a real, I think, substantive journey through this. And for the deeper divers, the skeptics who, the secular practitioners who are just not interested in these kind of reincarnational principles, I think once the kind of groundwork of understanding mind, understanding reality at these deeper levels is portrayed to people, all of a sudden this unapproachable material becomes dramatically more approachable. And so part of what I do is I look at myself as a kind of cultural translator. So there's this, this corpus, especially in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this is a really impenetrable text. I mean, I've read this thing 20 times in 10 different translations, and I think I have a beat on this book. And so part of what I do is present like kind of the access codes, right? To culturally translate these cryptic self-secret texts. Self-secret by design, they are written intentionally to be cryptic So I will provide these kind of access codes to bring these teachings into modern life and to show their utter complete applicability today, just as much as when they were penned, over 1,000 years ago.
Wow. It sounds exciting and a little scary, I have to say.
Well, I'm curious. Let me ask you, Dee. So when you say that, what sounds a little intimidating or scary for you? I'm curious why it even that lands with you that way.
Well, as much as the unknown is the thing that we fear the most, it's also kind of comforting to think of it as just, like some impenetrable dark area that we don't really have to worry about, because we don't know. And I don't know, and
Yeah.
so just not knowing is in a weird way. It's kind of like, yeah, I don't have to
Well,
worry.
that's a very interesting comment because, from an egoic perspective, ignorance is bliss. Ego puts its head in the sand around these teachings. Why? Because, like what I was talking about earlier, ego is exclusive identification with form. And so, if we wander very briefly to the deeper end of the pool here, if ego is exclusive identification with form, what happens when we die is we transition from that exclusive identification into more subtle and increasingly refined and formless dimensions. And that's where the fear comes from. Because something fully formed, the ego, which parenthetically is just an arrested form of development, how does ego relate to egolessness? How does form relate to formlessness? It doesn't. And that's where the fear comes from. But if we start to dislodge that exclusive identification, which we do versus we do it, one of the things I'll be doing is actually offering a little poll, a set of questions that I just ask people, super simple, that really helps them reveal to themselves the levels of identity that they identify with. And once we understand again the spectrum of who we are, and we start to dislodge that exclusive identification with form, then all of a sudden the fear starts to go away because we realize, hey, I'm not just this body. I'm so much more than this body. I'm not just my thoughts and emotions. I'm so much more than that. And so if we can start to do that with teachings like this, whoa, that's no small thing. I mean, that's really kind of a game changer because then the fear disappears because understanding is born. And you start to really get what these great masters, again, they have the same mind that we do. They totally have exactly the same heart and mind that we do. They've just done the deeper dive in the journeys into the heart mind to realize these extraordinary teachings and experiences. And then they come back as a kind of travel log, right? And they share these teachings with us. And so I have tremendous enthusiasm for this because I've been working with these things literally for 3 to 4 decades now. I've engaged in literally years of retreat around this, bringing these teachings into my direct experience. And so I attempt to speak not only from a doctrinal point of view, but most particularly what gives me the confidence is the experience, that you can actually experience these formless and therefore deathless dimensions of your being right now. I mean, in a certain sense, every night we go through this, but we just don't recognize it. Why? Well, that's the stuff we talk about. And so if we can start to recognize, we talked a little bit about lucid dreaming. Well, there's not just lucid dreaming, there's also lucid sleeping, maintaining lucidity or awareness in the deep dreamless state. Whoa, if you can do that, all the wisdom traditions say you're going to be really ramped up and ready for lucid dying. And so on another level, you could say that lucidity is one of the archetypal principles that we'll be exploring, lucidity being a code word for awareness. Can we, in fact, bring awareness to these previously unaware dimensions of mind? You absolutely positively can. You just need to have the map, the GPS, and then the vehicle, the meditations that actually get you there. And so my teacher, Punlap Rinpoche, talks about this a lot. I love his image. It's like if you're going for a really big trip, you want to be prepared. You want to make sure your gas tank is full. You want to make sure you have a good map. You want to make sure you have everything packed right. You want to have plan A. You want to have plan B. You want to have all these preparatory things intact. Same with this. Just prepare yourself, fill the gas tank, fill your heart and mind with this wisdom knowledge, and then set out on this voyage with confidence, with a sense of grace, hence graceful entry, taking birth. And so I wanted to say a little bit about this as well, Dee, that this program, you can't have life without death. You can't have death without life. And so this one's called Graceful Entry. It's about graceful birthing. How can we shape our lives now? How can we shape our consciousness moment to moment? How can we lucidly take form, voluntarily take form? And so once again, I'll target the end of life just as kind of archetype, but using the principles of conscious birthing, how can we take birth into different dimensions of life, even like right now, using these teachings? And so again, it's this kind of broad spectrum of applicability that most people come out of going, well, I had no idea these teachings had so much bandwidth in terms of the way I live my life right now. So.
What do you mean by the term non-materialistic view or approach to death?
Yeah. Okay. So whether we know it or not, we live, the vast majority of the Western world, live under the philosophical view of materialism, that fundamentally things really, truly, solidly exist. And for most people, when they hear that, they go, well, what do you mean, Tommy? Of course they exist. Well, do they really? Not if you ask the quantum physicists, not if you ask the deep philosophical and spiritual divers. And so whether we know it or not, it's really a cult. It's a cult of scientific materialism where everything is fundamentally reduced to frisky dirt, right? Everything is just the play of matter. And so this worldview, whether we know it or not, and many of us don't know it, it's a really fundamental blind spot, really drives a great deal of what we do in our lives. That we identify with form, right? I mean, ego is first and foremost the body ego. Sigmund Freud, ego is exclusive identification with form. Eckhart Tolle. Really look at your experience. So this materialistic view drives so much of the way we live our lives. It's the basis of consumerism, it's the basis of materialism, it's the basis of this insatiable acquisition, this appetite for form that we have. And so what this view also does is it subversively inculcates a fear of the demise of matter, of form, materialism. And so therefore, what a non-materialistic view puts forth, and all the wisdom traditions say this, you could say we replace the materialistic view with a spiritual view. That there is a non-materialistic, i.e. spiritual way to really look at these teachings, look at your life, and look at this thing called death. And so then, to rephrase much of what I've said over the last half hour within this kind of rubric, if we transfer our allegiance from materialism, from matter to spirit, which is a large part of what the spiritual path is about, then that is in fact what continues. That spirit is what doesn't die. That spirit is what goes on and on and on. And so that's a wonderful, beautiful term, but what does it really mean? What does spirit really mean in this regard? So, the materialism thing is a colossally important topic, because if the degree of fear that we bring to death is directly proportional, it's like a litmus test to our identification with form and to the materialistic way. And so the great spiritual masters have absolutely zero fear of death because they no longer identify with form. So what we do, we, meaning the traditions, is we pay homage to the appearance of form. You don't deny that, right? Things appear to exist in a materialistic way. But if you take a very close look, I mean, Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. If you take a very close look, you realize, and again, even the physicist will tell you this, matter is an illusion. And truly, literally, matter is an illusion. And so that's some of the other stuff I'll be drawing on, some of the teachings of the great quantum physicist, John Wheeler, and so many others, who really actually profess in pretty hardcore scientific terms that what we think of as matter, even from the consummate scientists who study matter, the quantum physicists, even that is an illusion. So we'll be drawing from that as a way to augment what the proclamations from the wisdom traditions have been, showing that, hey, wow, if we really bring all these different skill sets together, we can radically transform the way we relate to death by radically transforming the way we relate to reality even now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the whole journey is about systematically questioning assumptions about reality.
Oh, isn't it? Yeah, there's a classic maxim, appearance, the reason we suffer is appearance is not in harmony with reality. And so it appears matter exists. It appears that you're separate from me. It appears I'm living in a dualistic world. Again, even the scientists will tell you that's an illusion. Duality is an illusion. John Wheeler, the great quantum physicist, student of Einstein, said, there is no out there out there. So I throw this into the mix to give people a sense of the type of thing that I will be bringing to this program. Not just the Buddhist traditions, but neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, philosophy, physics, and the like, to show you how all these other wisdom traditions really echo some of these fundamental principles. And if we understand this sort of thing, first of all, it's revelatory, it's diagnostic, and it's also prescriptive. It will reveal, in fact, all these blind spots. It will show you, like when you're really afraid of death, what are you really afraid of? What is that? What's really going on there? And then so it diagnoses and it prescribes. So it reveals the blind spots, like you're bringing to the fore now. And then it just doesn't leave it at that. It's like, okay, well, what can we do about that? Well, we can start to change our views by the way we look at things. And so by changing the way we think, we change the way we perceive, and conversely. And so we'll be doing a lot of that, these contemplations, investigations, that really challenge some of our assumptions. Because if we go around in this unquestioned, unexamined way, which again, most of us do until what happens? What really brings people, a lot of people, onto spiritual path? Usually a challenge to the fundamental principles of materialism. Somebody dies, a career falls apart, a life falls apart, and this Western kind of trajectory of happiness and success is starting to be really challenged. It's dented. Well, wait a second, I put all my eggs in this materialistic basket. It ain't working. This basket is being pulled off from underneath my feet. And so, I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I ask people what brought you to meditation or to spirituality, some level of impermanence, some level of death, some level of a real assault challenge on this assumption of the materialistic way. And so again, I love that you brought this up, Dee, because it once again alludes to the scope of what we're doing here. Yes, we're going to be talking about death for sure, but we're going to be talking about all these principles, all these blind spots, because really, whether we know it or not, they dramatically affect the way we live and dramatically affect our relationship to death. If we have all our eggs in the materialistic basket, we will suffer in direct proportion to that level of identification with materialism. If we transition into a more spiritual outlook, exactly what this program and these teachings are designed to do, well, guess what? Your fear also directly dissolves in relationship to that. And then guess what happens? You can have a tremendously graceful exit, graceful entry, where you go through these transitional processes with tremendous confidence and grace. Because not only do you have this GPS installed in your heart mind that will orient you to an otherwise bewildering experience, but most importantly, you'll have meditations, you'll have some familiarity with these dimensions of mind now. And again, we cycle through this. We're not aware of it. Every night we cycle through a concordant experience of these states. So a little bit of lucid dreaming, dream yoga will be part of this program, a little bit of sleep yoga, to show people how, holy moly, I can work with these Bardo principles literally 24/7.
Wow, it sounds like a wonderful journey and a really important one.
Well, here's the deal. We're going to take it anyway, right? Why not fill the gas tank? Why not get the maps? Why not pack properly? We're not going to have a choice about this journey. But what we do have a choice in is, will we be prepared? And this is the great genius of these Bardo teachings, is they actually allow us to prepare. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, I love this statement. He says, the Bardos are a really perilous time if you're unprepared. If you're prepared in a really wonderful kind of alchemical, even tantric way, the greatest obstacle is transformed into the greatest opportunity, literally. And that's why they say that the literature is unequivocal here, that the greatest, most prepared practitioners really look forward to this transition, not in a weird suicidal way, but in the sense that they have a very deep experiential understanding of what's going to happen. And therefore, important thing to interject, this stuff is not just about you. It's about bringing this view and the confidence born from it to help others. And so I work a lot with death and dying. And, there's my mind is the same as yours. The storylines are different, but the nature of my mind is the same as yours. The nature of my mind and heart is the same as that person dying in the hospice. And so these teachings for me, and I can speak with personal experience, they have given me tremendous confidence to enter situations that are usually defined by tremendous pain, chaos, and bewilderment, and enter these spaces with tremendous ease and confidence because I know what's going on. And then that way I can convey through my own, you really just presence. Sometimes the most important thing to do is nothing, just simply be in that environment with stability born of your confidence. And so this is important to throw into the mix, that when we engage in this, and the program really emphasizes this, it's not just what we're doing for ourselves, it's what we can do for others, how we can help others transition, how we can really bring about graceful exits, graceful entries for others who engage. And again, it doesn't matter, you don't come in there kind of spewing forth these Buddhist things. This is just languaging. So yes, I'll use the Buddhist kind of coding system, but the fundamental translation project, as I alluded to earlier, is to show you how to bring this into your own vocabulary, your own life, so that when you're around loved ones, friends, and others who are making this transition, you will approach this with a whole new level of ease and confidence because you have that kind of inner vision, steadiness of born from your own experience. So that's really quite important. These teachings are so much more than what we do for ourselves. They also help you transition with pets. Pets go through a very similar type of journey. So we'll talk a little bit about how to help a pet transition. Some of the thornier issues. What do we do with things like euthanasia? Where does suicide fit in? How about abortion? Where does that fit into play? And so these are some of the heaviest topics, most difficult topics in the whole human kind of condition. And so we're going to face some of these quite directly and talk about them kind of point blank as a way, again, to give people a greater skill set for working with otherwise really difficult states.
What a gift to be able to enter into our bardos of various kinds with confidence and ease so that we can help others see the way.
I think so. Yeah. And again, I've had the experience, I've had the great good fortune of working very practically, in addition to teaching on this stuff, to being at the bedside of many who have transitioned. And I've learned so much being in the trenches, so to speak. And so that kind of practical level of experience will also be brought to bear, how to work with hospice and legal issues, medical issues, practical issues. So again, this is kind of broad spectrum approach that makes this program unique, at least in my estimation.
Well, thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into this work and into your teaching around this. And wishing you all the best.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks for the great questions. I appreciate it. And I really look forward to spending time with you all at SMC, one of my favorite places to be. And so super psyched about it. So see you then.
Great. Bye-bye.